in space, justice is a long way away.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Space Game Junkie Podcast. I, as always, am your co-host, Brian, and joining me, as always, is your co-host, Spaz.
Hello.
Your co-host, Julie.
Hey, how you doing?
And someone's dog. Your co-host, Thorsten.
Hello.
And your co-host, Jacob.
There is no greater disability in society than the inability to see a person as mole.
I like it. What's that from?
Some schmuck called Robot M. Hensel.
I like it, though. Friends, we have a guest joining us today for our topic who was brought to us by Julie. Julie, would you introduce your friend, please?
Yes, and first, I would like to admit that that's my dog and introduce my rat terrier, Maggie. And beyond that, joining us on the show today is my longtime friend and content generator for the other show we are on is Chris Dodson, otherwise known as Round Peg. Yay! Chris?
And you can decide whether or not I'm more or less important than the dog Maggie. So.
And to preface, yes, Julie, you are allowed to advertise.
Yeah.
The importance of the dog Maggie depends on whether you're a burglar or not. Two of our neighbors have burglarized. We have not. Maggie is part of the reason why. And yes, Chris and I co-host, along with a few other people, the No Prisoners, No Mercy podcast on Apple.
Is it only on Apple? Like you haven't put it anywhere else?
Nope. It's only on Apple.
Oh, you should. There are like 18 places you can put your podcast now. If you want, I could find an article to tell you how to do it. Yeah, you can put it on Google and Spotify and oh god, there's like 8 of them. There's like for Amazon.
Amazon. I will let you enlighten me then. Love to expand our audience.
Oh, yeah, no, yeah. They don't have to be just like I remember the early days of podcasts where it was all Apple. But now there's like if you go to the spacegamejunkie.com site and you see the podcast entry, you'll see like sign up on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple, Amazon, blah, blah, blah. There's like 8 of them. There's like 8 or 9 of them.
Yeah. Well, we've been doing it since 2008, so we've been around a while.
Right.
I remember when the only alternative was Podcast Pickle. The days.
What's that?
It was an old podcasting network that you could submit to other than Apple.
Huh.
And the site was ugly, but you know they were all there. If you did not have an iPhone or an iPod, then that's where you went. That was your podcatcher for a while. Unless you had a Zune. You could have had a Zune.
Oh, Zune. Adorable. Yeah, we'll talk about that after. But friends, today we're going to talk about a subject that is of big importance, I think, to a lot of people, especially as we get older and games become bigger. We're going to talk about accessibility. Oh, hey, everyone in the chat. Good to see you. Because games should be played by everyone. Everyone should be, if they can, have the ability to play video games because video games are joyful, and you shouldn't be denied that joy. And more developers and publishers are realizing this. Like for example, on the stream behind us, we have a trailer for Far Cry 6 going because Far Cry 6 has really impressive accessibility options. Even if you don't really need them, there are accessibility options for like, it visually tells you where there's a sound. So like if there's like an animal to your left, it'll say animal with a thing pointing to it's really impressive. I don't think I've seen it in another game actually, besides these Far Cry games. So making it easier for people of all ability to play these games is something very important. And Spaz, I think you had some foundational stuff you wanted to talk about in terms of accessibility.
Right. I put down 4 statements that I wrote up before the show, and the intention here is that we should all be able to agree on these 4 statements in order to have a discussion. And if anyone is coming into this and doesn't agree with one of these 4 statements, you're probably gatekeeping. And you should probably rethink your stance on this issue, because you're in the wrong. and that's really where that ends up. So the first statement is this: difficulty, approachability, and accessibility are all related concepts, and there's some overlap between the 3, but they are not the same thing. They represent a spectrum of the various barriers between the game and the player. Statement 2. If a game includes more than one level of difficulty, and players choose to play on an easier mode, that takes absolutely nothing away from the achievements of players who complete the game on the hardest mode or modes. If accessibility options are included to make a game more approachable to those with disabilities, then anyone who wants to play on hardcore mode, you can choose to not use those options. That's totally your call. Statement 3. A game may be approachable for most players while also being completely inaccessible to players with certain disabilities. The mindset should always be to reduce the barriers to entry so that more people can play. That does not mean that every game should have a quote-unquote easy win mode. It means that the ability to play the game should not in itself be a barrier. Statement 4. Everyone who plays games for long enough will eventually need some accessibility options, either due to illness, injury, or age. Disability is a spectrum, and multiple options are needed to account for all of those differences. When more people are able to enjoy games, everyone wins.
Those all sound good to me. If anyone has a problem with that, you can either leave or you can do a little bit of soul searching and try to realize why you have a problem with any of those.
Or you can type out an angry comment so we can laugh at you later.
Yeah.
Well, we'll delete it first, and we'll still laugh at you. But
yeah, we'll laugh at you in private. We'll laugh at you in private after we delete it. We'll copy and paste it in our private channel, and then we'll delete it so we can still laugh at it later.
Don't get us wrong. We find hate comments on our podcast immensely amusing. Just to clarify.
We do love comments. So
those are our ground rules.
Yeah,
those are our ground rules. Those are our establishing statements for where we're going with this discussion. And if you got a problem with that, you should probably find somewhere else to be, because this isn't the show for you.
I'm just going to jump in. When you talked about difficulty, I was reminded of the game I was playing this morning on the stream, Red Storm Rising, which has 4 difficulty levels. This game came out in 1988, and it's got 4 difficulty levels. And I've been playing on the baby difficulty level, the beginner difficulty level, and oh my god, this game still kicks my booty.
I was gonna say, you're still getting your ass beat. It's good that it has those options.
Oh my god, if there was no difficulty level, it'd be like, oh, that was a short game, 1 torpedo dead. You know what I mean?
if he just slapped you into the 3rd one from the bottom by default or something like that, yeah.
So I am glad that a game like that has difficulty options, because God, I mean, I can only imagine people rage quitting if it didn't so easily. But then I'm reminded of another game that doesn't have specifically difficulty options. I'm gonna bring up Starfleet 2 because I love it, you know that, but it doesn't have difficulty options. Rather, it starts you off, quote unquote, very simply, and adds complexity as you go, which I think is also great.
It has a good difficulty curve, as is the technical term.
Yeah. It's got you're pulling back layers of the onion as you go. It adds complexity as you go. It's got a really good difficulty curve, as Shogun said. So even back in the day, developers knew that sometimes you needed more options, which is good. But there were a lot of games that never had options. A lot of arcade games didn't have any options. You just jumped in, played for 3 seconds, died, and put in another quarter.
Also argue, though, back in the day that the games didn't have nearly the UI elements, the
Oh God, that's right.
tool tips, they just weren't as complicated. It was monkey see, monkey do. Something flashes on the screen. It's a very good indicator that maybe you should do something or you're going to die. Whereas,
you don't need accessibility options for Super Mario Brothers for the
Right.
most part.
Well, I mean, even say, go back to X-Wing versus TIE Fighter or something, or, those types of games. Your options were change your speed, rotate, shoot things. There wasn't all these UI elements that were necessary in order to make the experience bigger. You didn't have umpteen thousand things that you had to fight. It was usually a fight between you and maybe 2 or 3 other things.
Part of that is, of course, from the software standpoint, because there's also potential hardware limitations, and not everyone has the motor capacity to use a certain type of controller. But that's another thing entirely.
I've got to intervene here because I ran the first time into problems in the mid '80s. I don't even remember the game. I know, but it's exactly what Julie always says. There was supposed to be a red cross on the screen, and I couldn't see it.
Oh crap! Yeah, I was wondering about that.
Because it was a red, I simply couldn't see, and it was on some greenish type of background. No chance to see it.
Well, also along the lines of what Spaz was talking about, those of us who are over 60, and I think I'm the only one at this point, is a developer of my acquaintance who Chris also knows, when we were talking about games that require quick reactions and difficulty levels, he said, well, I can't play with people who have the reaction time of a rattlesnake on meth. And I have been faulted for that in various different competitive games. And when people find out how old I am, they say, you can't. One person actually said, you can't be as old as you say you are because nobody over 30 plays video games. I said, are you kidding me? I said, would you like me to introduce you to one of the people older than me who invented the online game? So there you go. There's another reason for difficulty settings. But yes,
fresh reminder, Pong has been out since 1972.
There's also the fact that even a decade ago, the average gamer is someone who grew up playing on consoles in the 80s or the 90s. And even 10 years ago, the average gamer was around the age of 35.
Well, so here it was people who played on the Commodore 64 and the Amiga, but
right. But the point is the same. It's the same generation of players who were born in the 80s or early 90s and are still playing now.
And speaking of the rattlesnake on meth Twitch mechanics, even in the multiplayer first-person shooter genre, there has been some ascent to difficulty, and just purely based on. I played a game called Combat Arms, which would had a series of servers that you could play on, and you could get matches, but it would base it off your your kill to death ratio. And so, if you were under, say, 0.6, you could play on a particular server, but if you averaged over 0.6, it would kick you up to the higher echelons. So if you did have an issue where, your Twitch mechanics weren't great, you could still play, and you could still play with other people at your difficulty level. And I think the major argument that could have been made towards those 4 points is, well, what about multiplayer? Don't dumb down my game so I could play with people who are suffering from disabilities. Well, there's your answer. You have difficulty-based servers, and the people that average over under, you can put them slot them in a category, and then gatekeep the people that are too good for that from getting on those servers so they don't end up ganking people.
Oh my god!
Nowadays we just Sorry, can I speak up? Now
was
you
gonna-
just have a ranked mode in games, which that's literally what this does.
I was really going to
That's literally what this
say.
does.
I was really going to say. I wish the Titanfall 2 servers had that kind of mechanic because, damn, it's needed. Oh my god.
Okay. The thing is, that mechanic is called skill-based matchmaking, and it has its own set of problems, as a lot of people can evidence, in that the determinants of skill are often rather arbitrary, fickle, and don't fit in all that well, as well as like the actual brackets between certain skill levels are also usually delineated arbitrarily and can. Point being, it's not easy to do.
I would think the kill to death ratio would be a good, solid metric for that, wouldn't it?
Kind of. The problem is, in most games, KDR is not the determining factor in winning. In most, like the overwhelming majority of games, especially in competitive settings, run on the objective play. If you think of anything from Call of Duty to League of Legends,
that's
they
true.
run
That's true,
on
yeah.
objective play.
So you're not.
And what constitutes
yes. No, you're not killing things. You're taking things, and that doesn't affect it.
And what constitutes a victory or a kill or an assist, like how much a kill or an assist contributes to victory, is much harder to determine on an individual level. So what most matches do is just match you up based on relative performance. Those like winning or losing the match. That then runs into problems of, for example, getting screwed over by a particularly bad teammate and suffering because of that, despite you yourself being good or at least average, but someone who's particularly garbage winds up bringing the whole team down, and you get the idea.
This is why all games should be. This is why all games should be co-op, like Deep Rock Galactic. This is why every game should be co-op.
Agree.
No more.
Well, I mean, if it offers multiplayer, it should offer a co-op option rather than just be forced PvP in all cases, because then you'll run into cases where you have people who are like me. I'm legally blind. I've been legally blind my entire life. My eyesight reduces my reaction times. I can't compete in most Twitch-based shooters because of this. But that doesn't mean that I'm unable to play. It just means I can't succeed. On the other hand, that does mean that certain games are inaccessible to me because of that requirement, that Twitch gameplay requirement of having those very fast reaction times. And then, of course, if you're getting sniped from across the map and you can't even physically see who is shooting at you.
Yeah, that's not fun. That's not fun.
It's kind of, yeah, exactly. It's a task that just doesn't become fun.
Because specifically because of this, I played a lot of World of Warships, because that is like the old man, broken, destroyed version of an FPS. Because,
oh, really?
Oh yeah. I mean, there's no such thing as being one shot in World of Warships. It's it can happen, but it's literally a dice roll.
Death strikes do happen, and occasionally you do get citadeled if you do something stupid, but typically you don't just get removed from the game when you make one mistake.
Right, because strategy is more important than, like, your aim, and a particularly well-placed strike is nice, but in World of Warships, it's not where you shoot, but sometimes not shooting, which is the better play. And so I tend to focus more on games that rely heavily on strategy or my placement or something to that effect over, a free-for-all team-based, shoot 'em up.
Yeah, I can't handle those either. I don't even have horrible eyesight, and I can't handle those. It's just, I just don't.
And then there's me.
Oh, how so?
And then there's me of casually attempts to playing Escape from Tarkov and suffers immensely because of it.
Oh, why would you do that to yourself?
I'm not gonna say on the podcast because the reason is very stupid.
That's fair, but I've watched some video of that game, and just watching the video makes me tense. Like, I can't imagine playing that game. Just watching the video is like, oh God, I'm anxious right now. I gotta stop watching.
It's extra bad for your blood pressure, yes.
Yeah, that game just does not like. Fernando, here's an interesting thing. Fernando said that one of the most surprising things to me is the amount of cheaters in multiplayer competitive games. Why is that surprising?
It isn't.
It shouldn't
the point
be.
Is to be. If the measure of success is winning by any means necessary becomes enticing.
Have you seen how many dicks there are online? I mean, there's so many assholes. This should not be surprising.
Along those lines, and I know there's going to be a lot of people who are cheaters that don't care, and I've had people say, well, you don't have I don't have a visible disability. I have 2 invisible disabilities. And yes, I have had people say, well, what, can't you see that red cross down there? And I said, no, I'm colorblind. How do you drive? I can't see certain shades of red and green. I can't pass the little dots in the circle thing. And I've even lost a friend over this. But I said, also bear in mind, if somebody isn't disabled in any way, they might know someone who is. And I said, I was raised by a mother who has had now at this point, but who had cerebral palsy. And in professional capacity, more than once, I have told higher ups to go F themselves over the whole thing. And so that's why I care, because I've got friends who need accessibility features, friends like Spaz and friends like Chris and people like my mom. And even if the game itself doesn't require an accessibility feature, when I was a game master for a private Ultima Online server, there was one individual. He had mobility issues, and that game was his only way of getting out of the house.
That brings up.
I'm going to bring up something that I thought was interesting that Total Biscuit once talked about. He used to do these very deep dives on when he reviewed a video game, and he would specifically spend an inordinate amount of time on the options.
On the Fov sliders, yes.
Yes, and he actually mentioned once, because people were constantly complaining about that. And he said, look, this is the one place where the developers kind of show their butt, so to speak, as to the arrogance that they have towards their player base. Because more options means that they are willing to recognize that the players might play their game in a way that they didn't originally intend. And might be the difference between somebody being able to play the game or not. And I have found that I tend to lean towards, because I myself am visually impaired. I have a very rare condition called Stargardt's disease. And so I have no central vision. I have all peripheral. So I can see, I basically tell people I look at life out of the corner of my eye, both literally and metaphorically. And so I tend to lean towards games that encourage modding, because those modders will, chances are, have some form of mod that's going to make my gaming experience easier to deal with. And so therefore I'm going to be spending less time fighting with my disability and more time fighting with the actual antagonist that they're meant for me to interact with. And number 2, those that do tend to have a lot of options within the UI specifically. Like one thing that I've always found very frustrating, I tended to gravitate towards MMOs because it's a little like your level of engagement is kind of up to you. Like for example, I play a lot of Black Desert, and I do a lot of life skilling in there, and I pretty much play Black Desert like most people play like Harvest Moon.
Yeah,
so
my condolences.
But it gives me an excuse to listen to a lot of audiobooks while I'm just doing a thing on screen.
Fair.
But
That's totally fair.
The one thing that I find absolutely disgusting with a lot of MMOs is they won't allow you to move the minimap. They might allow you to resize, refont, put it anywhere on the screen you want to, with every other window. But by God, that minimap has to be in the top right corner. And I'm sure there's a coding reason for that, but it infuriates me to no end because that minimap's in the top right corner. I tend to use a very large monitor. I mean, I actually downgraded. I used to have a 40-inch television that I use for a monitor, and I practically made out with that puppy on occasion. But when that minimap's in the top right corner, I almost have to stand up to see it. So therefore, minimap doesn't exist for me, and it doesn't in any MMO. And so any information that developer thinks should be on that minimap is just essentially gone to me. And I find that profoundly frustrating. But other than that, I mean, like, so your major MMOs out right now, like your Final Fantasies, your Elder Scrolls Online, all of those have at least some form of modding, or you can really manipulate that UI, which I do like, but for some reason the holy cow is the minimap, and the minimap is just atrocious if you're visually impaired in any way, shape, or form. I mean, it's literally the black hole where the game goes to suck.
Oh God, I had no idea.
Yeah, fully agree with that. Especially, I come back to my own color blindness right now. There are often shades of red or green used that I can't really see, and that's sometimes a bit infuriating, I would say.
Yeah. Have you found that there are any particular games that you couldn't play before someone modded in the ability to allow you to play it? Like, is there a game that was basically saved by mods in this regard? Anyone think of one?
What World of Warships was for me. Even World of Tanks, there was a really weird mod that I didn't really expect to be all that useful. In World of Tanks, they had a mod that turned everything nighttime. Because one of the things that I suffer from is light sensitivity. And a lot of games, they really like their brightness and you know, sun shadows and you know, light beams streaming directly into your eyes. Well, when your pupils don't dilate at the correct speed, that is headache inducing. And so I found it strangely really easy for me to play the game after World of Tanks allowed me to make it nighttime all the time, and B, all the tanks had headlights. So I could actually pick the tanks out far easier with the headlights than I could with them normally in the daytime. And so I could actually get on target a lot faster that way. There was a few other mods here and there, like World of Warships had a thing. I really struggled seeing the smoke stacks in World of Warships. And that's how you determine the speed of the ship that you're looking at. Like, you may know, okay, that's a cruiser. It's probably going to go around 30 knots. And that would tell you where to lead the target. But the smokestack would tell you if they were at full speed, 3/4, half, quarter, going backwards. But I couldn't see the smokestack. And so they did come up with a mod that it wouldn't tell you what speed they were necessarily going at, but it would tell you if they were going forward, if their engine was in the off position, or if it was going backwards. And that made a huge difference for me of knowing where to lead the ships. And if you're playing a battleship and where you can only fire every 30 seconds, that's kind of important in details that you need to know.
Yeah, that's entirely fair, because as I mentioned in the opening statements, disability is a spectrum, and what some people need will not necessarily be what other people need in order to fit their disability. Their disability may be completely physical, where they only have the use of one limb, and there are some people who are paraplegic and still able to game because there are accessibility controllers that have been designed for their use. And that's awesome. But a game that doesn't allow you to say rebind the controls will make that completely inaccessible to them. So that's why this topic is so important for so many people who might otherwise be invisible. They might be thrown under the proverbial bus if developers weren't able to figure out ways to make things more accessible for more people. And fortunately, on a related note, more developers have been actually doing that. They've been hiring groups of accessibility experts to deal with a range of accessibility issues, from color blindness to legal blindness to physical disabilities. And that's great. It's a good step. It's not the only step, but it's a good step forward.
Will say one of the other game changers specifically for me over the years was if you have a visual impairment, chances are that if you're of a particular age, I must say, you probably interacted with Zoomtext, which was a program that was specifically a magnifier for Windows itself.
Yep.
And it was diabolically opposed to any sort of video game being played at the same time that it was engaged. And it was a memory hog. It was something that was developed in the 80s. I mean, I used it specifically during, like, what was it, DOS 3.0? So it's been around for a long time.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Whew.
Because, I mean, I gamed... I mean, my first computer game experience was like a breakout ripoff on a Trash 80.
Yes. That was my first computer, was a Trash 80.
Yeah, ours was like the super sexy model that had a 5 megabyte hard drive.
Wow!
What?
Yeah.
I didn't know Trash 80s had hard drives.
Yes, you had to get the super sexy model. Well, actually,
oh my God.
My dad actually knew a computer programmer that put one in there for us.
Oh,
so,
man. I had a cassette tape drive on mine. That was as far as I went.
Yeah, the hard drive was, I mean, it was practically the size of a modern day laptop now, but actually it was thicker than one. But yeah, it was crazy. But they had DOS even back then. But for me, I think it was about Windows 7 Service Pack 2. They updated Windows Magnifier because it was a hot mess prior to that.
As you mentioned.
But when they created a full screen version of Windows Magnifier that actually worked properly and functioned pretty much exactly like Zoomtext, but didn't chew up, 3/4 of your RAM in order to do it. I find myself, like, for example, without Windows Magnifier, I could not even play Black Desert just because of they've modified the font from Korean font, which is teeny tiny, and it does not go with alphanumerics at all. And even still, it's kind of hard to read. There's a lot of times where I'll look at the name of an item and then go look it up online because the tooltip's just impossible to read. But I can play because of Windows Magnifier inside the video game. And there's a lot of times where UI elements that otherwise are inaccessible to me are now accessible because of Windows Magnifier, as odd as that is. And so there are certain tweaks that are outside of the gaming sphere. And this is why I'm not much of a console gamer, because my options are so few. I have no recourse. If I'm playing, say, I'll give a recent example. I bought the Ace Combat game on the PS4, and it came with Ace Combat 5 from like the PS2 era, and I couldn't play the new one, but I could play Ace Combat 5, and it was literally down to the UI elements.
Oh no!
Because the newer Ace Combat, the arrows that indicated where your target was relative to you were an outline, whereas they were a bar in Ace Combat 5. And so because it was only an outline in the newer game, I literally couldn't play it. Plus, I couldn't, it was the same color as all the clouds.
What?
So there was like no contrast between the cloud and the HUD. And there was no way to change that. And it was a complaint that was registered multiple times with people who did not have disabilities. And the response was, developer has no plans to change it. I'm like, you can't change the color of the HUD to be a little more user-friendly? It was despicable, and we do seem to have more issues with that with games that are in Asian countries, like Asian developers. They seem to be a little less accommodating, and a lot of that's down to culture. Like I believe, like the Japanese, if you were to literally translate disabled, it would be like low person, like just the vernacular that they use to describe people with disabilities, and
Dear Lord,
specifically in Japan, is awful.
Yeah, let me just jump in on that for a second. Yeah, part of that is cultural, as you mentioned. There is a mindset. Unfortunately, it's been around for so many years that disabled people in Japan should be sort of invisible, because by raising a stink about accessibility, you're rocking the boat, and rocking the boat is considered socially unacceptable. So if someone gets bullied and they happen to be disabled, an unfortunate question ends up being, well, what did you do to bring that about? What is your responsibility in being bullied? Did you cause this?
Oh no.
And again, that is an unfortunate mindset that has pervaded the culture, and it needs to change. It has been changing. There have been more steps forward in accessibility in the last few years, but unfortunately, there is that mindset that's still around.
I've got to say, that was in the past a thing here in Germany too. I can remember exactly that issue back from the late 70s, early 80s. You had to conform into society without standing out. It wasn't that extreme as in Japan, but it was there. Let's put it that way.
Wasn't there a time in from the 50s to the 90s where being left-handed was considered a disability?
Yep.
Well,
Yes.
Okay, it was longer than that, but
Yes,
wasn't it until very recently that it stopped being that?
Yep.
Yes.
They tried
Even
to,
literally demonized at one point, like you were a tool of the devil if you were left-handed.
yeah.
Well, shit.
Yeah, and that the thing with that is that people tried to force people to be right-handed, even if they were born left-handed. It was something to be stigmatized, and it wasn't until the last few decades where that particular mindset finally started to die out.
I suffer from exactly that, and it caused that my handwriting was very, very bad in school, and the teachers looked after this handwriting, and I've got into problems with that. Let's put it that way.
Oh no.
Nobody interests for my handwriting nowadays.
Well, yeah, I'm not left-handed, but I do have a writing disability that nobody would know about unless I told them, or if they saw my writing, for example. But,
Oh wow, I had no idea.
yeah, it doesn't come up because usually I end up typing. But there's this weird disconnect between my brain and my hands when I try to write. It ends up being a problem. It's one of the reasons why I ended up not pursuing a teaching career, because
You dodged a bullet there, sir. You dodged many bullets there, sir.
it's a different kind
Married
of
to
bullet
a
that I
school
ended up
teacher,
dodging.
everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, also,
I would have been teaching history. At least the majority of people I would have been teaching would have been, well, they would have been a little bit more mature, especially since it would have been history specifically that would have been working with. But the point is, I decided against that career specifically because of my disability and that I would have to do so much handwriting that other people would have to be able to read.
My grandmother used to joke about how she was left-handed, but they forced her, and this was in the 30s, how they used to force her to try to write right-handed. And joke, quote unquote, as in laughing through trauma, which is what people did
because there wasn't much other choice.
True. Okay. But it's becoming less of a thing, thankfully.
You know, I had a friend had emphasis that at one point he made fun on Facebook of people who were colorblind and thought nothing of it.
What?
And in the end, I just told him, I said, look, this has consequences you don't understand. I said, I was in the Army, but my first choice was the Navy, and my colorblindness kept me from being a pilot because otherwise I passed all the tests with flying colors. And I told him, I said, you know, maybe I can't see all the colors, but I can see true colors when it comes to people. And also an example of a game, sometimes developers do listen. And I want to laud this particular developer. And the game is called Octopass Traveler. And they went out and they took a survey of all of their users. I said, what different features do you need? And one of the things they added, because at first this game had tiny text, and if you were playing it with any kind of handheld, you can just forget about it. So back 4 years ago, this developer added adjustable font size just for that purpose. So bravo, Square Enix, in that one regard.
I gotta give, I mean, I've been playing a lot of Final Fantasy 14, and Square Enix, I think, does a pretty good job of making that game pretty accessible. I've noticed in the options there are a ton of options, move things around and make things bigger and that sort of thing. So
I've actually just mentioned, because I went up there and checked, the entire UI is highly customizable in every conceivable aspect.
Oh, that's good.
For the most part, yes. So like Roundpeg mentioned earlier about not being able to move the minimap. Well, in that game, you can.
Oh, good.
Very much doable. Want to plaster in the middle of the screen?
One of the few. Yeah, it's one of the few. That's why I did mention that one in Elder Scrolls, because most, like Black Desert, you can't. There's actually several you can't. And by the way, Final Fantasy 14, you used to not be able to. That was something that people screamed about. And during
general UI customization, yeah, I remember.
Oh, good on them.
Because I started playing back when A Realm Reborn came out, and it was not available then, and people were apparently really hammering on it. Like, I didn't even say boo about it, but apparently a lot of other people were, and it was like, you know, huge victory for the fans, because apparently thousands upon thousands were screaming about it.
Wow. Yeah, because a lot of people screaming about that would be like high-level World of Warcraft players who wouldn't necessarily want like specifically mini-maps, but specifically just every conceivable option for UI customization. Because for high-level play, being able to sort out your UI is critical. Being able to readjust every possible keybind is the more you can adjust the game. Because the thing is, when it comes to accessibility options, some people need those to play at like an average level, but like top-tier people need those so they can play at their best. That's just how it works. Like, if you look at any kind of like highly competitive raid player or raid player in like a shooter or League of Legends, they always have like 57 readjustment UI mods. Some of them will like switch their so like, for example, I've seen in Counter-Strike, some of them switch their gun to the left side of the screen because it works better on center map. That level of stuff.
You know,
It gets
gamers are
pretty
anal
insane.
retentive bastards. We're
That
all
is
shocked.
correct. But
This is
that's correct.
absolutely
But
true.
if we could benefit from it, then I'd say sod it.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to bring up it is strange that, and especially I live here in America, and
I'm sorry.
we have so many third rail subjects whenever it comes to comedy. Now comedians are being attacked on a regular basis for some slight comment that they make. But for some reason, being blind or deaf is fair game, and I've never understood that. That you can't make a joke about race, gender, sexual preference, any of those types of things. But make a blind joke, go right ahead. It's fair game, and I've always found that bizarre, and yet at the same time, I'm not mad. In fact, I'm kind of happy to a certain extent, because I don't care if you make fun of my visual impairment, as long as it's funny. It better be funny. If it's low-hanging fruit, I'm going to give you a hard time. But I do find it strange that the cultural zeitgeist allows for making fun of people who have a difficult time in life because of physical issues, but yet there's all these other sacred cows that can't be touched. I've never quite understood that, but you start to see, like, I've noticed there's been members of the trans community that are very upset about voice comms in games, because they feel like it outs them and it can lead to bullying and stuff. And I feel like if you're going to have that conversation, then you should be able to have a conversation about visual impairments within video games. And sometimes developers will be more willing to talk about that than they will people with physical disabilities. And I find that to be really odd.
I think there's an answer for that, and it's not a comfortable one, but the answer is that there is a pervasive idea that invisible disabilities don't exist. There is this mindset that it leads to the idea that some people will say, oh, well, some games shouldn't be for everyone. And then they just leave that argument there. They don't try to examine the nature of the argument any further than that. They just think, well, not everybody should be able to play, and they don't care.
They refuse to elaborate and leave, yes.
Right. And this happens with a lot of games. The From Software games are an obvious example. They get brought up a lot because some people don't want difficulty options or accessibility options to be added. Why? Why don't they want them added? Because they want to be able to say, well, I beat this game on the difficulty as intended, and that makes me special. But
well, I'd honestly make an argument with Elden Ring, because specifically the game mechanics are so centered around difficulty. Like, I don't know how you would introduce, I guess if the game was just just didn't do as much damage, you can stand there and be a damage pinata.
Yeah, like that's.
I don't
like. There is an easy way out in making an easy mode.
Right.
I mean, I'm legally blind. I've never played a Souls game. I've never played Elden Ring. I didn't play Sekiro, but I enjoyed the living crap out of watching people fail at it. That was my glee. That was the game for me. I can't tell you how many times I saw my friends playing Elden Rings or Dark Souls, and I would send them in Steam chat, watch out for that, ... never mind, you died. And then I would get an angry reply to that of, yes, I did, you asshole.
Just
and that was
blind luck.
And that was the greatest source of joy for me. I mean, I can't tell you the absolute loving joy. I mean, I would bring a tear to my eye every time that happened. And then when I got on Discord the next night, I would get a whole story of the build up, the drama, and then enter stage right is my comment, and then disaster, and so then I get the story twice, And that is Elden Ring for me.
No.
So if you can't play the game, play the meta.
I would like to make a comment. That is A, really petty, but also B, extremely funny.
Sometimes in gaming, you got to make your own game. It doesn't necessarily need code. We had an entire game in our Discord channel of pointing out when people were bad at video games. I mean, when we once all got together and played Black Desert, and the joke was, who was first to say, hey, so-and-so, they respond yes, and you say, you're bad at Black Desert. Because if you've never played Black Desert, it has so many gaming systems that are completely alien to anything else that invariably you're going to be bad at Black Desert.
Yeah, I've heard. It's why I decided to stay away from it to the best of my abilities. And also because the classes don't really appeal to me, but that's just me.
Now, on the topic of joking about people with disabilities, I have on more than one occasion during our streams when Brian and I stream games where I'm the one driving, I will make the comment of, hey, who let the blind guy drive?
I did.
Oh yeah, me. I'm the blind guy.
Preach it, brother. Preach it.
Clever. Funny. Sorry.
You know, sometimes I wonder, and I gave you an example, a good example of a developer listen, but here's a bad one. And I wonder sometimes if developers don't make accommodations for this because sometimes they're just totally oblivious. And a good example was I don't even know if it's still out there. It was based on a sci-fi channel game called series called Defiance. And the only text was a text box that was about a size of 8-point font, and the text going blazing by was in 6-point font, and yet at the time, the developer couldn't understand why there was no community behind the game. And it's like, well, that's because nobody can communicate with each other. And I wonder how many times it's just, well, they don't even think about it. They're just oblivious about it. And I think one of the important things that we can do as gamers, whether we have a disability or not, is make sure that game developers, whether we have personal contact with them or not, are aware of the need.
And I think a lot of people, there's no hate or active marginalization. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've walked up to somebody and then they find out that I'm blind, and you can just watch them freeze up, like their entire body will lock.
They don't know how to act.
Yeah, they don't know how to interact with you, and sometimes they'll say really stupid things. Like for me personally, a lot of people would say, "How many fingers am I holding up?"
No.
To gauge.
Oh god.
No.
Oh yes.
What?
You know what my response to that is?
Come on.
I flip them off and I say, "How many fingers am I holding up?"
That's
awful.
Yeah. Oh, Jesus Christ.
I got that once when I first got my glasses. So
yeah, I mean, it's just people don't know how to respond. It's the same thing if two regular people that had zero disabilities walked up to each other and one person slapped the other. The person who got slapped would have the same reaction as if I had walked up and introduced myself as a blind person. They just don't know what to do. The chaos has ensued. Their entire world has shifted, and they just don't know what to do. They plaster on a plastic smile and wait till it's going to all be over. And unfortunately, and I don't hate them for that. They just don't have any frame of reference. And so, sometimes it's really important as a disabled person to just go up and just be a normal person or crack a joke or something to that effect. And so I don't always feel like lobbying yourself or lobbying your visual impairment is the best way to go. Sometimes just being yourself is the best way. Because I mean, I often get the question, "Can you drive?" And I go, "Yeah, all the way to the scene of the accident."
Okay, that
Yeah,
sounds like something that's funny once.
I've been asked
is-
where I can drive, and I've told people who've asked, well, anyone who thinks I should be able to drive should have their eyes checked.
Fair enough. But
Well, I also said I wouldn't live in a country that would allow me to drive.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I wouldn't. No.
I had an eye doctor ask me, well, is there any kind of accommodation you think that you could use in order to drive? And I was like, you're the doctor. Shouldn't you know?
Oh God.
And so this is when I was like 16. And I told, I was like, yeah, I know exactly how I will never hit another car. And she goes, really, what? And she seemed really excited. I said, get me a monster truck. Get me a chainsaw with a 25-inch bar on the front and a rotating sign that says blind driver. I will never hit a single person.
Or a tank. A tank would also work.
16. I mean, this is literally something I came up when I was 16. My mom said, well, we could get you a seeing eye dog, but I don't think they'd last too long if you were driving.
Yeah, I don't think dogs can drive. Also, can I interject for a second? Because
absolutely,
when it comes to like specific disabilities, I feel like a lot of the issues with like accommodation can come down to people not knowing that certain disabilities just exist. For example, a friend of mine has a. Can I just mention? Let me finish, please. A friend of mine has something that's generally that I also sort of have, just a far less extreme version of it. It is sensitivity to high pitched noises. It is exactly what it sounds like. High pitched noises cause severe discomfort and/or pain when you hear them. Pretty simple stuff. It is remarkably unpleasant to have, remarkably annoying, and the issue with it is it's easy-ish to solve if you just take it into account with your sound design. But most people in most places don't bother because they don't know that's a thing. I think there's one gear that accommodated for that. That was Metro Last Light, which allowed you to disable in the accessibility options the whining sound when you got hit by a flashbang or an explosion, like the ringing in your ears. Because that is the specific example of a sound that would specifically cause that sort of sound. It's something that I actually kind of have. It's not painful, but I generally dislike high-pitched noises. I suspect it has something to do with my autism spectrum disorder, or just general hypersensitivity I have occasionally. And it's not. And I actually enabled that option in Last Light. It didn't hurt me. It just annoyed me. But I still was better off having it shut off.
I'll admit, Chris, what's the name of your disability again? What's the name of your thing with your eyes? What's it called?
It's disease.
Yeah, I'll admit I'd never heard of that until Julie talked to me. Julie told me about it. I'd never heard of it.
Well, it's far more common. Age-related macular degeneration is relatively commonplace, but getting it when you're 7, like I did, is incredibly uncommon.
Ouch.
So age-related macular degeneration is actually quite common and at least marginally treatable, whereas the juvenile version is 100% not treatable. So I've met many elderly people just through the course of I had a very public-facing job for quite a while, and I ran into elderly people all the time that would come in and they're like, well, I have macular degeneration. I'm like, me too. And they just stared at me oddly because once you hit past 65, 67, it's relatively commonplace. They say 1 in 7 people over the age of 65 will eventually get it. And it's livable, but it literally will change your life. And it rocks a lot of people's world, but people who had my particular visual disability, they actually say you get put on suicide watch because a lot of people who end up with it, because my particular disease is more common between the ages of 14 and 21, and the people who do get it, they immediately put them on suicide watch because it does just absolutely it's an incredibly frustrating existence. I always tell people, when it comes to frustration level, I start when I open my eyes, I'm at 70% of tolerance. And my other analogy that I always give is I pour out 32 ounces of give a crap in a given day. And once I'm out, I'm just out. And I would tell that to management whenever I would go to work and just say, look, I got 32 ounces. And once that's gone, it's gone. So you use that however you want. But once it's gone, you don't want to mess with me because I'm over it. And being a 6'3", 250 pounder,
that feeling I do know.
They were very motivated to accede to those wishes. So,
well, one of the things that my mom dealt with all her life, as far as being disabled, is people around her, and I've seen this in a professional capacity, had a tendency to think she was stupid because she walked funny, is how people would put it. And my response, and I've dealt with this in a professional capacity, and I can't tell you how or why, but my response is always the same, is my mother spent her life teaching deaf people how to speak. What did you do with your life? And a real world example is one of my coworkers is deaf. And when she introduced herself, she said at a meeting, she said simply that, well, English is my second language. And everybody looked at her. They had no idea. And I said, seriously? I'm the only one that understands why English is her second language, despite the fact that she was born here? I said, yes, her first language is American Sign Language, you imbecile. And so people sometimes are just oblivious. And I get frustrated with it, and a lot. And I can get sometimes short with people because I have good friends and relatives who are disabled, and some things are totally invisible, like my PTSD. So, and yes, sometimes even video games, and that's nothing that a video game can accommodate for, but that even affects my gaming sometimes. There are some subjects in some games I can't play because it's a trigger.
It's fair.
So would we all say that gaming in general is getting better at being accommodating to people with a variety of disabilities? Okay.
Yeah,
but
baby steps. Baby steps forward.
Okay. Can I say, I feel like there are two separate issues. There are those who make games a lot more accessible, and then there's the weird and difficult to understand pushback against it. And I feel like that's why I say yes, but because obviously there are a lot more accessibility options in your average game than there were in 1986. But there are also a lot more people who are angry at those options for some reason.
I don't understand that at all. I'm going to be honest. I don't understand. I mean, this is a joyful hobby. Don't we want more people to experience that joy? I don't understand how you could push back against allowing more people to experience the joy that video games provides. I just don't get it.
Is gatekeeping. It's gatekeeping is the reason why.
Maybe that's it. I don't understand gatekeeping.
They want to, right. The mindset is they want to feel like they did something special. And because they did it, they want to be the only ones who can have accomplished that. And anyone else has to be on their level if they want to accomplish that too.
But that's
which is
dumb.
Like a strange mindset.
It's dumb. Well, it makes no sense to me.
There is a modern mindset that I find very frustrating, and because it kind of leads to a greater societal issue. But a lot of the people that gatekeep this kind of stuff is because they purchased it and they're playing this game. They associate that with their identity. So everything becomes a personal attack. And you see this with a lot of things, whether it be if they chose to go to the movie theater to see that movie, They have to that choice is a part of their identity. So if you disliked that movie, it's a personal attack. If you buy a video game and then somebody says something negative about the developer, say they are abusing their employees or something, well, that they view that as a personal attack because they chose to buy that video game. They can't disassociate themselves with their things. And it kind of leads into the societal issue where the products define you. And I don't know when that started to happen, that materialistic thought that the objects you own are a part of you.
I think that's...
So therefore, people attacking the product are attacking you. And that's where you get a lot of that pushback. And so I think we should kill marketing people. That's my...
Now,
there is a tribalistic mindset that goes along with it. It's a very tribalistic mindset.
I don't disagree.
I mean, I said that jokingly, kinda, because I do feel that marketing, I mean, everything is marketing now, and they have successfully gotten people to identify with the product. They jump on the hype train. It's that becomes a part of their narrative.
Well, I think
for their lives.
I think it's because people lack the nuance to separate the thing with their own identity. Like,
one thing I will say, you're making it sound like it's a recent issue. It is.
It's not a recent. It's a capitalistic issue that's been around for years.
It's an issue that I would argue is inherent with consumerism, and consumerism predates World War One.
Yeah, it's not a new thing, but it's getting worse.
It's more prevalent in the modern age as far as communication. There is more communication, so there's more of it. I mean, if you have a small community where telephones are the only means of communication, and somebody attacks the fact that you bought Bounty paper towels, you're going to have a scuff with that one person. If you're on Twitter, it's a completely different. That's what I'm saying. It's exacerbated by. I'm not saying that it originates there.
Remember when computers and smartphones became a thing? And we're like, yay, we're all going to have access to more information. And now it's, oh no, we have access to more information.
Well, okay. Can I end this on a literary note?
Are we ending
this? No, but the tangent because there is a big lecture in Poland. I won't go into detail, but one of the characters in it is it was written in like the late 18th century, late 19th century. But one of the characters in it is a professor who has invented flying metal, and his belief was that once humans learn to fly, they will fly up into the sky and see that borders are meaningless and stop being mad at each other.
Oh no, that's not what they'll say at all. No, that's no.
So, on the off chance you're not aware, the Wright Flyer was invented about 4 years after that book, and World War I happened 11 years after.
Oh God, that's a good point.
Well, as far as capital, the capital reasons that Brian had mentioned, and I have seen this in a professional capacity, is the Americans with Disability Act has been able to shove accommodations down people's throats professionally that otherwise would refuse to do so, and that has enabled many people to be able to say, look, you're going to accommodate this because it's a reasonable accommodation and we don't care if you like it or not. And I think what we need is some equivalent in the game development industry of the Americans with Disability Act. And I know it's going to add a cost of the game. I'll pay a little extra money. I'll pay it.
Absolutely.
And I think we need that because I've seen this in the private sector. And in many cases, this is the only way I have seen business people add in accommodations because the law forces them to do it, whereas decades ago, they would not have.
When did the Americans with Disabilities Act, does anyone know when that took effect? I don't remember.
According to my very extensive research of Google search, 1990.
Holy shit.
I was going to say it was in the 90s.
Holy shit. Sorry, excuse me. That recent?
Yeah, 1990.
Oh,
Well, that was when it
Wow.
passed, but it didn't actually go into effect fully as far as mobility stuff. So, like in America, you'll see like bumps that are supposed to, acknowledge when you're about to move into traffic and stuff like that. And those things weren't actually lawfully enforced till like 93.
oh God.
Well, okay. Wikipedia doesn't tell you that. It just says signed into law by George H.W. Bush on 1990.
That explains why my apartment complex built in the 70s has no ramps or elevator or anything. So
Right. Right. And that's
They can be
because
sued for that reason.
they weren't forced to, so they saved on money by not including it, or they didn't think about it. And because to many people, disabilities are invisible, they don't see them unless you're forced to see them. That has led to what we have now, where they have to be forced to see them so that they can understand people have disabilities and they need to be accommodated.
Would you guys say that people with disabilities are they being more seen than they have been in the past, or is it still a big problem of being seen these days?
It's better, not perfect.
Right.
Yes.
It's gotten better.
Yes.
What I've seen on a professional basis is a lot of it is about money. People don't want to put the money into the accommodation. And sometimes in the private industry, people like me are in a position to say no. It's not something that you want to do, but something that you got to do. And also, I think a lot of people, well, like Brian was surprised about 1990. A lot of people don't realize how recent some changes in the law were. Case in point, until last year, equal employment opportunity didn't apply to me. I was considered exempt.
Well, I guess progress happens slowly, but at least it's happening, I guess.
Sorta. I think the physical world that I am forced to inhabit with has gotten a little friendlier. But still, when I talk to people that have, like, anytime I dealt with any form of management or somebody who was in charge of me nominally, that was always, I always ended up having to train them. And that's the way I looked at it. There was no malice, there was just ignorance. And I can forgive ignorance. I can't forgive malice. But I mean, I would get some pretty hurtful questions like, why aren't you on disability? Why are you here?
What?
And my response to that was, ask me that again, and we're going to have a problem. And
oh my God.
And they didn't even, well, I mean, it wasn't from malice. They just honestly, didn't understand why I would want to have gainful employment.
Because you want to be a contributing member of society, like any
right,
person?
but they don't see it that way.
Oh, God.
Well, even the government didn't like that. They're just because whenever I did finally, like, my back was shot, my knees were shot, and they had technologically moved on without ADA, obviously, and I was just ready to go home. I was literally having to do 45 minutes of stretching exercises just to get out of bed in the morning.
Oh, wow.
Because of how much pain I was in. And it was a young man's job, and I was like 43. It was just not, it was beyond me to do that job anymore. And so whenever I contacted disability, their first question was, well, I don't know if you qualify. You have too much work history.
What?
Like, really?
What?
Seriously.
I was like, yeah, I'm so sorry that I tried to stay off the dole. I apologize that you want to punish me because I was trying not to suck on the government's, teat, so to speak. And because I was trying to not do that, you're going to try to deny me service. And of course, on disability, you get denied the first time. It doesn't matter if you're a floating head. and you have no body, they would deny you the first time, saying you're perfectly able-bodied. And in my appeal, I was like, well, A, you didn't even have me assessed by an eye doctor. And B, please don't punish me for trying to be a useful member of society for 20 years. And they did approve it the second time, but that's within the government that's supposed to be, ADA compliant and all those sorts of things. But I mean, it's important to note that the world doesn't hate people with disabilities. They just have no experience. And so on some level, I felt that, I used to be a very angry young man. I felt like the whole world was out to get me. And that's just not true. And it took me a long time to realize that the physical world that exists is, not made for people like me. And so the onus is at least partially upon me to make that world friendly for myself and others. And so with that perspective, I don't do that because the world doesn't deserve my frustration. I do that so that I do not frustrate myself and lead myself to an early grave through anger and frustration for no reason. And I think if we could all have that level of tolerance of people who do not share your opinion or we're at odds with, if we could just realize that maybe those people do not have our same experience, and we can listen to what they have to say and then come to accommodation with each other one-on-one every day, and we all do that together, maybe the gaming sphere and the greater world would be a slightly better place.
I agree, but there's a distinct lack of empathy in this world today. And
I would drop the microphone if mine wasn't so expensive.
Well, opinion. If there's some people that just can't be reached, and so those people should be mocked horrendously. That's why trolling exists, is for people that are intransigent. But if there's somebody who's willing to take an appeal, and somebody who's willing to give an appeal, we can round up the rest of them. All we need is a majority.
The problem with that is this, and what I've dealt with on a professional basis is there are some people, and I've had people just absolutely despise me for decades, and then after 20 years of holding the door for this bigot, when I walk through, finally one day the person holds the door back for me. But that is not always the case. And in some cases, when people are unreachable, what happens, and there was a Harvard professor that talked about this, all-out aggression becomes microaggression, and it is no less hurtful.
Yeah, fully agree.
And that's the weird thing about hostility, is some people don't even realize those microaggressions are microaggressions, or they deny that, well, that's not what I meant to say. Well, if that's not what you meant to say, then maybe you should try rephrasing it next time, or maybe rethink before you speak.
I mean, I would say, do you call out those microaggressions all the time? But that just sounds exhausting. And then doesn't that just put the onus on you for calling it out rather than the person doing it?
Yeah, for white knighting.
There, on a personal basis, how I have dealt with it is I have corrected people, I have ignored people, but sometimes it reaches a certain level, and I won't go into the story, it's a long one, where I finally said, look, I'm not going to tolerate it anymore. It's become open hostility, and I filed a sexual harassment complaint, and that resolved it. But there are some people, no matter how many times you correct them, will keep on calling you dirty names, will keep on harassing you. There are people who call me the equivalent of the N-word on a daily basis. And, if you confront them about that, you'll say, I didn't mean that. Oh, I didn't mean that. Well, then why have you been saying it every day for the last 10 years, despite that I've corrected you? And as much as I would like to round up people like that and take them behind the barn, unfortunately, that's not an option. So all you can do is do what Chris is, it's like, do your best to adjust the way you act. You can react to the world and then sometimes try and get a reasonable accommodation.
That's true. You only have control over yourself. True. So make yourself
ultimately
the best you. Huh?
Yeah. I was going to say, ultimately, it does come down to being seen enough that this is not a disability. This is something that a lot of people are dealing with. Therefore, it's normalized. And then other people who don't have that disability know how to deal with it. And it takes time.
Yeah.
It takes so much time and effort. But ultimately, because everyone who lives will eventually have some sort of disability if they live long enough, this matters.
Yeah.
And if it's a little step here or there, fine. But it's got to be a step forward. There has to be. Because we're not going to get anywhere unless people are taking these things into account. And if one mind gets changed every day, fine. Make it one mind. And then go from there.
I feel like it's really important that being morally upright, if you have standards, live up to those standards.
Yeah.
Because nothing undermines your cause more than not living up to your own standards. And you will generate a level of respect if you're socially consistent with your values. And I think that's where, because people will cotton on to that, and you will get a groundswell of support. Like if you are sitting in the comments or a forum for a video game developer, and you consistently, logically, and behave like an adult when you're requesting for something specific, and other people support you, and you don't engage the trolls, and you just keep hammering on, fighting the good fight, don't get off on a tangent, and just continue to hammer home what it is that you want to see, then I think that is far more useful than being the loudest. You don't have to be the loudest. People respond to consistency. They respond to people who are willing to give mutual respect. And I think that is the way forward. And I think subtly, in some ways, in certain corners of the internet, that is becoming, there has been a groundswell of that pervading the cultural zeitgeist. So as long as you do all of those things, good things will eventually happen, but you have to stay consistent and persistent, and good things will come, and you will gain support one way or another.
I wanted to comment on something that Spaz said just now, and here's a real world example. The Buddhist order I belong to, the founder's son was disabled. He had a physical disability, and this young man died very young in his life, but he had a very large effect on the world around him in Japan. And he once said that if I can, the way he put it, if I can save one person, he meant change one person's mind, then my life has had meaning. That said, however, where I work, I am basically a minority of one, and I have been a trailblazer for over a quarter of a century. And I've reached the point where I'm just tired of it. And I finally said, that's it, reasonable accommodation. And if I don't get that, we're going to see you in court. And if I have to take it to the Supreme Court, I will. I understand what Chris said, but I'm just tired. You get tired of the microaggression. You get tired of the outright aggression. You get tired of the people who give you outright bigotry. And I said, sweetie pie, I was doing this job before you even existed. But yet you get tired of that sometimes. And I know my mom, who had cerebral palsy, she got tired of the way people taught her. You saw her, they'd see her walk and they think she's stupid. I said, this woman teaches deaf people how to speak. What is your problem? Look at Stephen Hawking, one of the greatest minds in this last century. He was disabled. Where would our world be without that man's massive intellect? And I know this is a touchy subject for me, but it's just, and yes, we've already had a call out in the stream for another show about this particular subject. And I admit it, I go off on all kinds of tangents when this subject is raised.
It's fine. I mean, we should talk about these things. We're going to have a separate show on representation at some point where we can also talk further about all this.
Oh man, because I'm qualified to do that.
But I think this. I think we can start wrapping up unless anyone has anything that they'd like to end on.
Yes, I want to thank Chris for coming on the show.
Yes, thank you.
And
Chris.
a lot of people who have something like Star Guards like this wouldn't be so willing to come forward. And I know someone else who has Star Guards that would not have been willing to come forward. And I'm glad he is a voice in the wilderness, so to speak. So to speak. So bravo, Chris.
Yes, thank you, Chris, for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me, and I've never shied at shouting into the void. Sometimes the void shouts back,
I think if enough of us.
Some of us live in the void. I mean, this whole podcast is about living in the void. So
I think if enough of us shout in the void, we'll start being seen and heard. So
well, Chris is such a knowledgeable person, and I better be careful because you'll replace me with him. But Chris is such a knowledgeable person on many subjects. On our other show, No Prisoners, there have been many days when I just have to bring up a subject. I have 4, and I just said, Chris, go, and he fills up the whole hour. And I said, wow, really smart guy. Please don't replace me.
What's the name of that podcast again, so folks can go subscribe to it?
No Prisoners, No Mercy. And yes, sadly, the only place it is on Apple Podcast because I'm either too lazy or too stupid to put it someplace else.
Well, I mean, it's all based on RSS feeds, so I should be able to find it. But if not, we'll talk about that. But folks,
throw in here. There is one thing I wanted to also mention here before we go.
Go ahead.
There is a charity called Ablegamers. Brian and I have raised money for them before.
Yes.
And what they do is they make custom controllers so that people with certain disabilities are able to game.
Yeah, they are good people. Absolutely. So yeah, definitely check them out. That's going to do it for this week, folks. Next week, we're going to have a guest. We're welcoming back the developer of Star Dynasties. They just had a big DLC drop. Oh, I found your podcast, Julie, on my Android app.
That's the one with the angry-looking nun on the front.
Yeah, video game podcast, edgy, dodgy, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I'll subscribe. So you don't need to be on Apple to find that podcast. Anyway, so yeah, next week we're going to welcome back the developer of Star Dynasties. They just dropped a big DLC for that game that adds a ton of stuff. So we're definitely going to welcome back Glenn. Very excited about that. And tomorrow we'll see you for more Red Storm Rising. Maybe this time America won't be taken over by the USSR. I don't know. We'll see. A lot of weight on my shoulders with that game. But I want to we had a great chat today. I want to thank everyone in the chat for being so great today. Very active chat today. Chris, again, thank you so much for coming on, talking about your experiences. Very good.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, pleasure. And I just want to wrap up by saying what we always try to say here. If you can, my friends, please get vaccinated. If you haven't already and you can, please, for the love of God or gods or whoever, or whatever, please.
Respective deity of choice.
Yes, whatever, or not, if you don't have one. For the love of the universe, please get vaccinated. For the love of your fellow human, please get vaccinated. With that, we will bid you goodbye. Have a great day. Be safe, be well. Please take care of each other, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.